The Arizona sun didn't just shine that July afternoon. It consumed. It devoured. At 112 degrees, the asphalt shimmered like water that would never quench your thirst. And the air itself seemed to warp under the weight of heat, so brutal it could kill a man in hours if he wasn't careful. Bryn Adelaide Hartley had been careful for exactly 4 hours and 17 minutes, and she was losing. The 8-year-old sat cross-legged on the shoulder of State Route 77, her back pressed against the scorching metal of an overturned Honda Civic, her arms wrapped around a 6-month-old baby who had stopped crying 30 minutes ago. That was worse. The crying had been terrible, yes, piercing screams that seemed to echo across the empty desert for miles. But the silence was worse. Silence meant River was giving up. She couldn't let him give up. Bryn's lips were cracked and bleeding. Her throat felt like she'd swallowed sand. The pretty blue sundress her mama had bought her for the trip, one with the white flowers that mama said matched her eyes, was now brown with dust and dark with sweat. But she didn't move, couldn't move, because moving meant looking at the driver's seat. Moving meant seeing mama's face frozen in that last terrible moment when the tire exploded and the world started spinning. So Bryn sat, and she held River, and she counted the cars that passed without stopping. 37 vehicles had seen a little girl covered in dust waving desperately, holding a baby on the side of a highway, and every single one had accelerated past. Some had swerved to give her more space. One had honked as if she were an obstacle in the road rather than a child begging for help. But none had stopped. The 38th car was different, though Bryn didn't know it yet. She didn't hear it coming because her ears had started ringing somewhere around the 3-hour mark. She didn't see it because her vision had narrowed to just River's face watching for the rise and fall of his tiny chest, counting each breath like a prayer. What she heard first was the engine, not the smooth hum of the sedans and SUVs that had been ignoring her all afternoon. This was different, deeper. A rumble that seemed to shake the ground itself, that cut through the heat and the silence and the ringing in her ears like thunder on a clear day. Bryn looked up, squinting against the sun that had been trying to blind her for hours. A motorcycle. Black and chrome, bigger than any bike she'd ever seen, bearing down on them like some kind of metal beast from one of the storybooks Mama used to read her before bedtime, before everything went bad, before they had to run. The bike slowed, stopped. Bryn's heart hammered against her ribs. Every instinct Mama had drilled into her over 3 years of running screamed at her to hide, to grab River and disappear into the desert, even if the heat would kill them both. Don't trust strangers. Don't trust men. Don't trust anyone who looks dangerous. And the man climbing off that motorcycle looked very, very dangerous. He was tall. That was Bryn's first thought. Taller than Papa Silas had been, which she hadn't thought was possible. He wore black leather despite the heat, a vest that showed arms covered in tattoos that seemed to writhe in the desert shimmer. His face was hidden behind dark sunglasses and a beard that was more gray than black. And when he pulled off his helmet, his hair fell past his shoulders in a way that Mama would have called uncivilized. But he'd stopped. That was the thing Bryn's 8-year-old mind kept circling back to. 37 cars had seen her and driven away. This scary man on his scary motorcycle had stopped. He didn't approach right away, just stood there beside his bike, one hand still on the handlebar, studying the scene with an intensity that made Bryn feel like he was seeing everything. The overturned car, the child covered in dust, the baby who wasn't crying. Then he moved, and Bryn flinched. "Don't hurt us," she heard herself say. Her voice came out wrong, too quiet, too broken. "Please don't hurt us." The man froze mid-step. Slowly, so slowly, he raised both hands, palms out, a gesture of peace that Bryn had seen before but never trusted. "Not gonna hurt you, kid." His voice was rough like gravel under tires, but there was something in it that made Bryn's racing heart slow just a fraction. "Is that your mama in the car?" Bryn couldn't answer, couldn't look, just held River tighter. The man took another careful step forward, then another, his movements deliberate and slow, like he was approaching a scared animal. Which Bryn supposed she was. "What's your name, sweetheart?" "Bryn." The word came out automatically before she could stop it. Mama had always said, never tell strangers your name. But Mama wasn't saying anything anymore. Mama was. No, don't think about that. Bryn, the man repeated it like he was tasting it. That's a strong name. I'm Colt. And that baby you're holding, is he breathing, okay? That's when Bryn really looked at River, really saw him. His lips weren't just pale anymore. They were blue. A horrible wrong blue that made something cold shoot through Bryn's chest despite the murderous heat. His eyes were half open but unfocused, staring at nothing. His chest, she realized with dawning horror, wasn't moving. He stopped, Bryn whispered. He was crying and then he stopped, and I thought that was good, but it's not good, is it? It's not good. The man Colt was moving faster now, closing the distance between them. How long since he stopped breathing? I don't know. I don't know. Time is all wrong. It's all wrong. Give him to me. It wasn't a request. Colt was already reaching, and every nerve in Bryn's body screamed at her to run, to protect River, to not trust the stranger with the scary face and the scary bike and the scary arms covered in pictures she couldn't quite see. But River's lips were blue, and Bryn had been alone for 4 hours, and she was 8 years old. So she made a choice that would change 3 lives forever. She lifted River, placed him in the tattooed arms of a man whose last name she didn't know, and trusted. Colt's hands were surprisingly gentle as he took the baby. Large, scarred hands that looked like they'd seen violence, cradling 6 months of innocence like he'd done this before. He laid River down on a clear patch of asphalt, tilted the tiny head back, and listened. He's got a pulse. Weak, but it's there. Colt's fingers probed River's mouth, checking for obstructions. What happened crash was hours ago. Why'd he stop breathing now? He was choking. Bryn found herself talking, the words spilling out like water from a broken dam. On spit or something, I don't know. He kept making this sound, this awful sound, and I remembered Mama showed me when she showed me what to do if a baby chokes. And I tried, but I don't know if I did it right. And he stopped making the sound, but then he stopped everything. And I thought, maybe he was just tired. Babies get tired, but his lips are blue, and that's bad. That's really bad, isn't it? She was crying now. Hadn't realized she'd started. The tears cut tracks through the dust on her face and burned in the cracks of her lips. Colt wasn't listening anymore. His full attention was on River. He positioned the baby face down along his forearm, head lower than his chest, and delivered 5 careful back blows between the shoulder blades. Nothing. He flipped River over, located the compression point on the infant chest, began careful thrusts with 2 fingers. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, nothing. Back blows again. Chest compressions. A rhythm Bryn didn't understand but recognized as urgent, desperate. This man was fighting for River's life, and Bryn could only watch. Somewhere in the distance, a hawk screamed. The sound cut across the desert like a knife, and Bryn wondered if that was what death sounded like. If that was the sound that would mark the moment River left her alone in this burning world. Then River coughed. It was small, weak, but it was there. He coughed again, harder this time, and liquid spilled from his mouth, clear fluid that had been blocking his airway. Colt turned him onto his side, supporting the tiny body as River coughed and finally screamed. That beautiful, terrible, wonderful scream. Bryn launched herself at them both, wrapping her arms around River, even as he wailed in Colt's hands. She was sobbing now, really sobbing, the kind of crying that came from a place so deep she hadn't known it existed. River was alive. River was breathing. River was screaming, and it was the most beautiful sound she'd ever heard. You did good, kid. Colt's voice cut through her sobs. You hear me? You kept him alive. You saved him. I just finished what you started. Bryn looked up at this stranger with his scary face and his gentle hands, and his words that felt like medicine on a wound she'd been carrying for hours. He's okay. Her voice was so small. He's okay. Dehydrated, needs formula and water and medical attention, but he's breathing. That's because of you, Bryn. You understand. You saved your brother's life. Brother? The word hit Bryn with unexpected force. River wasn't her brother, not really. Mama had explained it once in that careful way she used when talking about Papa Silas. River was Mama's baby. River was 6 months old. River was the reason they'd been running even faster these last few months, ever since he was born, ever since Papa Silas found out Mama was pregnant, and no, don't think about that either. But Brother felt right. Brother was what she'd been for the last 4 hours, holding him, protecting him, keeping him alive when Mama couldn't anymore. Colt was studying her face now, and Bryn wondered what he saw. Did he see the dust and the tears and the exhaustion? Or did he see deeper to the fear that lived in her bones, the terror that had been her constant companion for 3 years? Bryn, I need you to be very brave right now. Can you do that? She nodded. Brave was all she knew how to be anymore. I need to check on the driver. On your mama. You understand what I'm asking? Bryn understood that Colt needed to confirm what she already knew. What she'd known since the moment the car stopped rolling and she'd crawled out through the broken window. River clutched to her chest and looked back to see Mama slumped over the steering wheel at an angle that was all wrong. She's not sleeping, Bryn heard herself say. I know that. I'm not a baby. She's not sleeping. Something crossed Colt's face then. Pain, maybe, or recognition. No, sweetheart, I don't think she is. He stood slowly, River still cradled against his chest, and offered Bryn his free hand. She took it. His palm was rough with calluses, warm despite the leather gloves he'd pulled off and stuck in his belt. Safe. That was the word that came to Bryn's mind, unbidden and unexpected. This hand felt safe. Together they approached the overturned Civic. Bryn had been avoiding looking at the driver's side for 4 hours and 17 minutes. Had kept her back pressed against the passenger side, had focused on River on the highway, on anything but that terrible stillness, visible through the shattered windshield. Now she looked. Mama Violet Grace Sutton was 38 years old and had been beautiful once. Bryn remembered photos from before, from when Mama smiled in pictures instead of looking over her shoulder. But the woman in the driver's seat didn't look beautiful anymore. She looked broken. Crushed against the steering wheel, her neck at an angle that made Bryn's stomach turn, her eyes open, but empty. Gone. The words settled into Bryn's chest like a stone. Mama was gone. Colt reached through the broken window, pressed fingers against Mama's neck. Checking for a pulse they both knew he wouldn't find. When he pulled his hand back, his jaw was tight, and Bryn saw his throat work as he swallowed hard. I'm sorry, kid. I'm so sorry. Bryn nodded. Couldn't speak. Couldn't cry anymore. She'd used up all her tears keeping River alive. There was nothing left for Mama. Colt was staring at Mama's face with an intensity that Bryn didn't understand. His eyes, she realized now that his sunglasses hung from his vest, were pale blue. The kind of blue that belonged to frozen lakes in winter, not Arizona deserts in July. And those eyes were fixed on Mama like he was seeing a ghost. Did you know her? The question came out before Bryn could stop it. You're looking at her like you know her. For a long moment, Colt didn't answer. Then so quietly, Bryn almost didn't hear it over River's fussing, he said, Yeah, I knew her a long time ago, before you were born, before everything. Before everything. Bryn understood that phrase. She used it herself sometimes. Before everything meant before Papa Silas, before the yelling and the hitting and the running, before Mama's eyes got tweed and scared, before Bryn learned to be quiet and still and invisible. She was running away. Bryn offered, not sure why she was telling this scary stranger about their life. Maybe because he'd stopped. Maybe because he'd saved River. Maybe because he knew Mama from before everything, and that seemed important somehow. From Papa Silas, he's mean. He hurts people. Mama said we were going to Grandma's house in Tucson, that Grandma would protect us. We were almost there. Almost safe. Colt's hand tightened on River, his jaw clenching. Your Papa, this Silas. What's his last name? Blackwell. Papa Silas Blackwell But he's not my real papa. He's Mama's husband, was Mama's husband. They got divorced, but he wouldn't leave us alone. We've been hiding for 3 years, moving every time he got close. Mama was so tired. Bryn's voice cracked on the last word. She was so tired. Something dark crossed Colt's expression. Something that looked like anger, but not at Bryn. At something else. Someone else. Bryn listened to me carefully. Does this Silas know where you were going? Does he know about Grandma in Tucson? I don't think so. Mama was really careful. We left in the middle of the night. Didn't tell anyone. Just grabbed our stuff and ran. Like we always do. Did. She corrected herself. There would be no more running with Mama. Mama said this was the last time. Said we were going to disappear for real. That Grandmama knew people who could help us change our names and everything. Colt nodded slowly, processing this information with the careful attention of someone planning several steps ahead. Bryn recognized that look. Mama had gotten it sometimes when she was figuring out their next move, their next hiding place. A sound cut through the desert air. Not a hawk this time, an engine. Bryn's head snapped toward the highway, her whole body tensing. Every car was a threat now. Every vehicle could be Papa Silas tracking them down, finding them when they were most vulnerable. But the white pickup truck that pulled onto the shoulder didn't look like Papa Silas's black Tesla. It looked old, dusty, normal. A man and woman climbed out elderly, their faces creased with concern, and the kind of weathering that came from a lifetime under the Arizona sun. Oh, my Lord! The woman breathed, her hand flying to her mouth as she took in the scene. The overturned car, the child covered in dust, the baby in the arms of a man who looked like he belonged in a different kind of story entirely. Are you all okay? We saw the skid marks from the road, came back to check. I'm calling 911 right now. She pulled out a cell phone, started dialing. The man, tall and lean, with the bearing of someone who'd spent time in uniform, approached more slowly. His eyes moved from Bryn to River to Colt, assessing the situation with practiced efficiency. Frank Dalton, he introduced himself. Former Army, if that matters. This is my wife, Carol. What do we have here? Colt shifted River carefully. Car went off the road, looks like hours ago. Driver's deceased. These kids were out here alone. Baby, stopped breathing, got him going again, but he needs medical attention. Girl here, he nodded at Bryn, saved him first, kept him alive, kept herself alive. She's the real hero. Frank's eyes softened as he looked at Bryn. That true young lady, you've been out here alone this whole time. Bryn nodded, suddenly exhausted beyond measure. Now that there were adults here, now that she wasn't alone anymore, her legs felt like they might give out. She'd been holding herself together through sheer will, and that will was finally crumbling. Carol was talking rapidly into her phone, pacing back and forth. Yes, State Route 77, about 15 miles south of Winkleman. Overturned vehicle 1, fatality 2 children, infant, and how old are you, sweetheart? 8, Bryn whispered. 8 years old. We need ambulance, police, CPS probably. Yes, I'll hold. CPS, Child Protective Services. Bryn knew those words, knew what they meant. They meant strangers deciding where she went. They meant being separated from River. They meant potentially being sent back to Papa Silas because the law said biological fathers had rights even when those fathers were monsters. No. The word came out louder than Bryn intended. No, don't call them. Please. They'll send us back. They'll send us back to Papa. And I can't go back. Carol lowered her phone, looking confused. Honey, you need help. You both do. These nice people from the state, they'll find you somewhere safe to stay while they figure out what to do. Papa Silas will find us. Bryn's voice rose to a shout, panic flooding through her exhaustion. He always finds us. Mama said never trust the government people, they'll send us back. And he'll be so mad. He'll be so mad that Mama took us. He'll hurt us. He'll hurt River. She was hyperventilating now, her vision starting to tunnel. River started crying again, feeding off her panic. The desert spun. Strong hands gripped her shoulders. Colt kneeling in front of her, River transferred to Frank's careful arms. Those winter blue eyes locked onto Bryn's with an intensity that cut through her panic. Bryn, look at me, right here. Breathe with me. He took a slow, exaggerated breath. Let it out. Did it again. Bryn found herself matching him, her racing heart beginning to slow. That's it? Good. Now listen, I know you're scared. I know you've been running for 3 years and you're tired and your mama's gone and everything feels like it's falling apart. But you did not survive 4 hours in this heat, keeping your brother alive just to give up now. You hear me? Bryn nodded, tears streaming down her face again. These people, Colt continued, gesturing to Frank and Carol, they're trying to help. And yeah, CPS is going to come and they're going to ask questions and it's going to be scary, but I'm not going anywhere. You understand? I stopped. I'm not driving away. Whatever happens next, you're not alone in it. You promise? Bryn's voice was small, childlike in a way she hadn't let herself sound in years. I promise. It was a promise from a stranger, a man she'd known for maybe 20 minutes. A scary-looking biker with tattoos and a leather vest in a past that Bryn could sense like a shadow around him. But it was also the first promise anyone had made her since Mama died. And Bryn, 8 years old and orphaned and terrified, chose to believe it. Carol had resumed her phone conversation, giving more details to the emergency dispatcher. Frank stood with River, gently bouncing the baby who'd finally quieted down, studying Colt with the assessing gaze of one military man, evaluating another. You serve? Frank asked finally. Colt stood, helping Bryn to her feet. Army Rangers, 3rd Battalion, out of Fort Benning. Overseas Iraq, 2 tours. Frank nodded slowly. Figured. You have got the look. The way you handled that baby, the way you're handling this situation. You've seen crisis before. More than I'd like. Colt's voice was flat, emotionless. But Bryn heard something underneath. Pain, maybe, or regret. The girl trusts you, Frank continued. That's not nothing. Kids, they know. They can sense things about people that we can't. Or maybe we can, but we've learned to ignore our instincts. Kids haven't learned that yet. Colt glanced down at Bryn, something unreadable in his expression. She shouldn't trust me. She doesn't know me. But she does. Frank's voice was certain. Maybe not your name or your story, but she knows what matters. You stopped when everyone else drove by. You saved her brother, and you're still here. In my experience, that tells you everything you need to know about a man's character. Before Cole could respond, another engine sound cut through the desert air. This one was different. Official. The mechanical wail of a siren growing closer. Bryn's hand found Colt's gripping tight. He squeezed back. A silent reassurance. The ambulance arrived first, followed closely by a sheriff's SUV that kicked up a cloud of dust as it skidded to a stop. EMTs poured out professional and efficient, heading straight for River in Frank's arms. We got a 6-month-old male, respiratory distress, possible aspiration. Frank briefed them like he'd done this before. Gentleman here performed infant CPR, got him breathing again approximately 15 minutes ago. Baby's been crying, which is good, but he needs fluids and a full workup. The paramedics took over, their hands gentle as they began examining River. One of them, a young woman with kind eyes, looked at Bryn. And you, sweetheart, are you hurt? Bryn shook her head. She wasn't hurt, not in the way the paramedic meant. Her body was fine. Dehydrated, sunburned, exhausted, but fine. Everything else, everything that was broken, was deeper than they could see. The sheriff emerged from the SUV, and Bryn's breath caught. Sheriff Rita Vargas was 50-something. Her dark hair shot through with silver and pulled back in a severe bun. She wore sunglasses that hid her eyes, and her hand rested on the weapon at her hip as she surveyed the scene. Her gaze landed on Colt, and Bryn felt him tense beside her. Step away from the child, sir. The sheriff's voice was calm but carried the weight of authority that brooked no argument. Bryn's grip on Colt's hand tightened. No. Honey, I need to ask this gentleman some questions. Why don't you go sit with the nice paramedics while we talk? No, he saved River. He saved my brother. Sheriff Vargas pushed her sunglasses up, revealing sharp brown eyes that seemed to see everything. I understand that, and I'm grateful, but I still need to speak with him. Protocol. Colt gently extracted his hand from Bryn's grip. It's okay, kid. Let them check you over. I'll be right here. You promise. I promise. Bryn let the paramedic lead her toward the ambulance, but she kept her eyes on Colt and the sheriff. Kept watching, making sure he didn't disappear like everyone else always did. She couldn't hear what they were saying, but she could see Colt pulling out his wallet, handing over what must be a license. Could see the sheriff's expression shift from suspicion to surprise. Could see her making a phone call, speaking rapidly to someone on the other end. The paramedic checking Bryn's vitals was talking, asking questions that Bryn answered automatically. Yes, she'd been out here for hours. No, she wasn't hurt. Yes, she was thirsty. No, she didn't know exactly when the crash happened. Time had gotten strange. Everything had gotten strange. In the ambulance, River was hooked up to an IV, his tiny arm secured to a board to keep the needle in place. He was crying, which the paramedic assured Bryn was a good sign. Crying meant breathing. Crying meant alive. Bryn watched them work, feeling disconnected from her own body. She was there, but she also wasn't. Part of her was still sitting in the dust, holding River, counting cars that wouldn't stop. Part of her was in the driver's seat of the Civic with Mama, watching the tire explode, feeling the world start to spin. But part of her, the part that mattered, was watching Colt talk to the sheriff, making sure he kept his promise, making sure he didn't leave. He didn't leave. Sheriff Vargas approached the ambulance, her expression softer now, but still professional. Bryn Hartley. Bryn nodded. I'm Sheriff Vargas. I need to ask you some questions about what happened here. Is that okay? Another nod. Questions were fine. Questions were safe. Questions couldn't hurt her. Can you tell me what you remember about the accident? Bryn took a breath, let it out, began to speak. She told the sheriff about leaving in the middle of the night, about driving for hours, River sleeping in his car seat, Mama checking the mirrors every few minutes like she always did, about getting closer to Tucson, closer to Grandma, and safety, and starting to believe that maybe finally they'd made it. Then the tire, the explosion of sound, Mama fighting the wheel, the car leaving the road, the rolling, the terrible rolling, everything spinning and breaking, and Bryn's voice caught. She couldn't talk about the moment the car stopped, about crawling out through broken glass, about looking back and seeing Mama. That's okay, honey. You're doing great. Sheriff Vargas's voice had gentled. What happened after the crash? So Bryn told her. 4 hours and 17 minutes compressed into a few short sentences. Holding River, trying to flag down cars, nobody stopping, River choking. Bryn remembered Mama showing her once how to help a choking baby, trying it, being terrified she'd do it wrong. You did it right, Sheriff Vargas said firmly. You saved your brother's life. That's incredibly brave. Mr. Colt finished it, Bryn corrected. I just kept River alive until he got there. Mr. Garrison stopped when 37 other vehicles didn't. That says something. The sheriff paused. Bryn, do you know where your father is? And there it was, the question Bryn had been dreading. Papa Silas isn't my real father, Bryn said carefully, using the words Mama had taught her. He was Mama's husband. They got divorced. There's a restraining order. He's not supposed to come near us. But he did anyway. Is that why you were running? Bryn nodded. He always finds us. Always. Mama said this time would be different. That Grandma would help us really disappear. But now, Mama's. She couldn't finish the sentence. Sheriff Vargas's jaw tightened. She glanced over at Colt, who was leaning against his motorcycle arms, cross-watching. And Mr. Garrison, had you met him before today? No, but Mama knew him from before. He knew her name when he saw her. His face got all sad. I see. The sheriff made notes in a small book. Bryn, I need to explain what's going to happen now. The paramedics are going to take you and River to the hospital in Tucson. You're both dehydrated and River needs to be fully examined. While you're there, someone from Child Protective Services is going to come talk to you. Bryn's whole body went rigid. No, they'll send us back to Papa Silas. Mama said they always send kids back to biological parents. The law doesn't care if the parents are bad. That's not always true, honey. And with a restraining order on file with documented domestic violence, they can't just hand you over. But we do need to find family for you. What about this grandmother you mentioned? Do you know how to reach her? Grandma Rose Sutton. She lives in Tucson somewhere. I don't know the address. Mama just said we were going to Grandma's. That Grandma would know what to do. We'll find her, Sheriff Vargas promised. In the meantime, you and River need medical care, and we need to figure out temporary placement until we locate your grandmother. Temporary placement, foster care, strangers being separated from River. Bryn's breathing started to speed up again. What about Mr. Colt? The words burst out before Bryn could stop them. Sheriff Vargas blinked. What about him? Can we stay with him just until you find Grandma? The sheriff's expression shifted to something between surprise and concern. Honey, Mr. Garrison is a complete stranger. You just met him an hour ago. We can't just hand you over to someone you don't know. But I do know him. Bryn wasn't sure where the certainty came from, but it filled her chest solid and real. I know he stopped. I know he saved River. I know he promised to stay, and he's still here. That's more than I know about foster people or CPS people or anybody else. And Mama knew him from before everything was bad. If Mama knew him, if she trusted him enough to stay calm when she saw him, then I trust him too. It was the longest speech Bryn had made in 3 years. Mama had taught her to be quiet, to be invisible, to never draw attention. But Mama was gone, and Bryn was terrified of losing the one person who'd stopped to help. Sheriff Vargas studied her for a long moment. Then she walked over to Colt, and they had another conversation that Bryn couldn't hear. She saw Colt's surprise, saw him shake his head, saw the sheriff talk more, gesturing to Bryn and River, saw Colt look at them, really look, his expression complicated in ways Bryn didn't understand. Finally, they walked back together. Bryn, Sheriff Vargas said carefully, Mr. Garrison has agreed to emergency temporary custody for 72 hours while we investigate and locate your grandmother. This is highly unusual, and it's only happening because we have no foster placements available at this time of night, and because you're clearly bonded to him after the trauma you've experienced. But I want to be very clear, this is temporary. 72 hours. If there's any indication that you or River are not safe, this arrangement ends immediately. Do you understand? Bryn understood that she was being given a gift she hadn't dared hope for. 72 hours, 3 days. Not long, but longer than she'd had with anyone except Mama in 3 years of running. 3 days to not be alone. 3 days to keep River close. 3 days to figure out what came next. I understand, she whispered. Mr. Garrison, the sheriff turned to Colt. You understand the responsibility you're taking on. These are traumatized children. They need stability care and, most importantly, safety. Any sign of trouble, any indication that this isn't working, and I'm pulling them. You'll be under supervision. I'll be checking in, and we'll be running a full background check. Run whatever you need to run. Colt's voice was steady. These kids need help. I can provide it for 72 hours. Why? The question came from Sheriff Vargas, but Bryn wanted to know too. Why are you willing to take on 2 children you don't know? Colt was quiet for a long moment. Then he looked at Bryn, and she saw something in those winter blue eyes that looked like understanding, like recognition. Because 37 cars didn't stop, he said simply. And I did. That means something, has to mean something. And because, he paused, because I knew their mother. 20 years ago, before I deployed, before everything went to hell, I knew Violet Sutton. And if she was running from someone bad enough that she'd risk everything to protect these kids, then they deserve someone to keep protecting them now that she can't. The words hung in the desert air like a prayer. Sheriff Vargas nodded slowly. All right, hospital first. We'll do the paperwork there. Mr. Garrison, you are officially responsible for these children for the next 72 hours. God help us all. They loaded River into the ambulance, still hooked to his IV, still crying weakly. Bryn climbed in beside him, and Colt followed, looking distinctly uncomfortable in the small space filled with medical equipment. As the ambulance doors closed, Bryn caught one last glimpse of the overturned Civic, of Mama still slumped over the wheel, of the desert that had almost claimed all three of them. Then the door sealed shut, and they were moving, and that chapter of Bryn's life was over. The chapter that came next, she had no way of knowing, would be even stranger, even harder, but also in ways she couldn't yet imagine better. Because Colt Garrison had stopped when everyone else drove by. And that single choice, that moment of compassion from a man who looked dangerous but whose hands were gentle, would change everything. The hospital in Tucson was bright and cold and overwhelming after hours in the desert heat. Bryn sat in an examination room while a doctor checked her vitals, shined lights in her eyes, asked questions in a gentle voice that made Bryn want to cry all over again. She was dehydrated, sunburned, exhausted, but otherwise unharmed. River was in a different room being examined more thoroughly. Colt had gone with him, and Bryn had wanted to protest, wanted to keep both of them in sight, but exhaustion was pulling her down like an undertow. A nurse brought her water, which Bryn drank too fast and had to stop when her stomach cramped. Food appeared a sandwich that tasted like cardboard, but filled the gnawing emptiness that had been growing for hours. Through the open door, Bryn could hear Colt's voice talking to doctors, explaining what had happened. His voice was calm, matter-of-fact, but Bryn could hear the edge underneath, the stress he was trying to hide. He'd promised to stay, and he was keeping that promise. A woman in a blazer appeared in the doorway, late 40s, kind eyes, carrying a tablet, and wearing a badge that read Child Protective Services. Bryn's whole body tensed. Hello, Bryn. My name is Evangeline Porter, but everyone calls me Angie. I'm a social worker with CPS. I know this has been a terrible day for you, and I'm so sorry for what you've been through. I just need to ask you a few questions, okay? Bryn nodded. She could do questions. Questions were easy. Can you tell me about your home life before today? Before the accident. So Bryn told her. Not everything. Not the worst parts. But enough. Moving every few months. New schools. Mama always looking over her shoulder. Papa Silas finding them anyway. The yelling. The bruises Mama tried to hide. The way Bryn learned to be very, very quiet. Angie took notes, her expression carefully neutral, but her eyes sad. And this restraining order against Silas Blackwell. Do you know if it's still active? I think so. Mama said it was forever. But Papa didn't care. He called anyway, showed up anyway. The police never did anything. Sometimes the system fails, Angie said quietly. And I'm sorry it failed your mother. We're going to do better by you and River. I promise. Another promise. Bryn was collecting them like stones in her pocket, heavy and hard and real. Sheriff Vargas told me about the temporary custody arrangement with Mr. Garrison. I need you to understand this is very unusual. We don't typically place children with strangers, especially not someone with. She paused. With Mr. Garrison's background. What background? Bryn asked. Angie hesitated. That's something you should discuss with him if you feel comfortable. But Bryn, I need you to know that you can tell me if you ever feel unsafe. If Mr. Garrison does anything that scares you or makes you uncomfortable, you call me immediately. Okay. She handed Bryn a card with a phone number. Bryn took it, nodded, but she knew she wouldn't need it. Colt was scary looking, yes. Covered in tattoos and rough around the edges and clearly carrying his own weight of pain. But he wasn't scary, not the way Papa Silas had been scary. There was a difference between looking dangerous and being dangerous. Bryn had learned that difference over 3 years of running. The questions continued about Grandma Rose, about where they'd been living before, about River's father. That last question made Bryn pause. Mama never said, she offered carefully. River's only 6 months old. Mama had him after we left Papa Silas. She said, she said sometimes good things come from bad situations. That river was her blessing. Angie made a note. We'll need to determine paternity eventually, for legal purposes, but that can wait. For now, you and River need rest and stability. With Mr. Colt, Bryn said firmly. For 72 hours, Angie corrected. Then we reassess. If your grandmother can be located, you'll likely go to her. If not, we'll need to find appropriate placement. 72 hours. Bryn clung to those words. It wasn't much, but it was something. When Angie finally left, Colt appeared in the doorway, River in his arms. The baby was cleaned up, wearing a hospital onesie and IV still taped to his tiny arm. But he looked better, more alert. Almost maybe okay. River's dehydrated, but otherwise healthy, Colt reported. They want to keep him overnight for observation, make sure there's no complications from the aspiration. You're cleared to go, but they're recommending you stay too. Keep you both together. Where will you be? The question came out smaller than Bryn intended. Right here. They're setting up a cot for me. I'm not going anywhere, kid. Promised, didn't I? He had. And he was keeping it. Just like he'd kept his promise to stay at the crash site. Just like he'd kept his promise to not drive away. Bryn Hartley, 8 years old and orphaned, and more alone than she had ever been, felt something shift in her chest. Not hope exactly. Hope was too dangerous. But maybe possibility. The hospital room they ended up in had 2 beds. River got the official hospital crib hooked up to monitors that beeped softly. Bryn got a regular bed with stiff white sheets and pillows that smelled like bleach. Colt got a cot that looked way too small for his large frame set up in the corner. A nurse brought dinner, which Bryn picked at. The food was better than the sandwich, but still sat wrong in her stomach. She was exhausted, but sleep felt impossible. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the car spinning, saw Mama's face, heard River not breathing. Can't sleep, Colt's voice came from the darkness. He was sitting on his cot, silhouetted against the window where Tucson's lights spread out like scattered stars. Bryn shook her head. Yeah, me neither. They sat in silence for a while, comfortable silence somehow, the kind that didn't need filling. Mr. Colt, Bryn finally asked. Just Colt is fine, kid. Colt, how did you know Mama? She heard him shift, saw his shadow lean forward, elbows on knees. 20 years ago, I was 28 and stupid and about to deploy to Iraq. Your mama, she was 18 and beautiful and too good for a guy like me. We dated for a few months before I left. I thought when I got back, we'd figure it out, build something real. But war changes people. I came back different, wrong, and she'd moved on, found someone else. I never blamed her for that. Papa Silas, I guess, never knew his name. Just knew she'd married someone, had a kid. He paused. That kid being you. Bryn absorbed this. Mama and Colt. Before everything. Before Papa Silas and the bruises and the running. When you saw her today, Bryn said quietly, in the car, you look sad. I was sad. Nobody deserves to die like that. Especially not someone who was just trying to protect her kids. Especially not Violet. Another silence. Then Colt spoke again, his voice rough. Bryn, I need you to understand something. These 72 hours, this temporary custody thing, it's just a stopgap. They're going to find your grandma and you'll go live with her, and that's good. That's how it should be. I'm not. I'm not someone who can take care of kids long term. I'm broken in ways that don't fix. I'm doing this because your mama deserves better than her kids going to strangers, and because I owe her for a lot of things. But don't get attached. Okay, don't start thinking this is permanent. Bryn listened to this speech, heard the pain underneath the self-hatred that made Colt believe he wasn't worthy of good things. She'd heard similar speeches from Mama about how they couldn't trust anyone, about how it was just the 3 of them against the world. about how Bryn needed to be strong because Mama couldn't always be strong enough for both of them. But Mama had been wrong about some things. She'd been wrong about all strangers being dangerous. Because Colt had stopped. Colt had saved them. Maybe Colt was wrong too. Okay, Bryn said simply, because arguing would get her nowhere. Because 72 hours was better than 0 hours. Because sometimes you had to take what you could get and be grateful. Okay, Colt echoed, sounding relieved. Bryn lay back down, pulled the stiff hospital sheets up to her chin, and closed her eyes. This time exhaustion won. She drifted off to the sound of River's soft breathing in the beeping monitors and Colt's presence solid and real in the corner of the room. When she woke in the middle of the night, gasping from a dream of spinning cars and blue lips, Colt was there. Hey, you're okay, you're safe, just a dream. He didn't try to hug her, didn't invade her space, just sat on the edge of her bed close enough to be real, far enough to give her room to breathe. River, Bryn gasped. Right there, look. See breathing, sleeping, okay. Bryn looked. River's chest rose and fell, steady and sure. Alive. Mama's really gone, Bryn whispered. It wasn't a question, but saying it out loud in the darkness made it real in a way it hadn't been before. Yeah, kid, she really is, and I'm sorry. I'm so damn sorry. What happens to us now? Colt was quiet for a long moment. Honestly, I don't know, but I know you're tough. Toughest kid I've ever met. You kept your brother alive for 4 hours in that heat. You flagged down help. You trusted a scary stranger because you knew you needed help more than you needed to be safe. That takes guts. So whatever happens next, you're going to handle it because that's what you do. It wasn't a promise of happily ever after. Wasn't a guarantee that everything would be okay, but it was real, honest, and somehow that was better than false comfort. Bryn lay back down. This time she reached out and grabbed Colt's hand, his rough, scarred, gentle hand. He didn't pull away. They stayed like that until Bryn fell back asleep. And when she woke again in the morning, Colt was still there, still keeping his promise, still proving that sometimes the scariest looking people have the biggest hearts. And sometimes when 37 cars drive past, the 38th one stops and changes everything. The courthouse smelled like old wood and broken promises. Bryn sat on a hard bench outside the courtroom, her legs swinging because they didn't reach the floor. River asleep in a carrier beside her. 3 days had passed since the crash. 3 days of living in Colt's small house on the edge of Tucson, learning the rhythms of a life that felt temporary, even as she desperately wanted it to be permanent. The house wasn't much. 2 bedrooms, a kitchen that barely fit a table, a living room dominated by a motorcycle engine in various states of disassembly. But it was clean, quiet, safe. Colt had given Bryn the main bedroom, set up a crib for River that he'd bought at a thrift store, moved himself to the couch without complaint. He'd also, Bryn had discovered, spent those 3 days frantically trying to find Grandma Rose. No luck. Rose Sutton had died 4 months ago. Heart attack. Sudden. The only family Mama had been running toward was gone, buried in a cemetery that Bryn and River would never visit, which meant today's hearing wasn't about temporary custody anymore. It was about permanent placement. And Silas Blackwell had lawyers. 3 of them. Expensive ones in suits that probably cost more than Colt's motorcycle. They stood in a cluster near the courtroom doors, speaking in low tones, occasionally glancing at Bryn with expressions that ranged from pity to calculation. Silas himself stood apart, his back straight, his face composed into an expression of concerned fatherhood that made Bryn's skin crawl. He wore a charcoal suit, a blue tie shoes so shiny they reflected the fluorescent lights. He looked respectable, successful, safe. Bryn knew better. She'd spent 8 years learning to read the tension in his shoulders, the tightness around his eyes, the way his jaw clenched when things didn't go his way. She'd spent 3 years running from the violence that lived underneath that respectable exterior. And now the law was going to give her back to him. Bryn, Colt's voice cut through her spiraling thoughts. He sat down beside her, 2 paper cups of water in his hands. He offered her one. Drink. You need to stay hydrated. She took the cup automatically, her hands shaking slightly. The water tasted like paper and fear. Is Mr. Fletcher here yet? Bryn asked. Gus Fletcher, the lawyer who'd agreed to represent Colt, who'd spent the last 3 days building a case on borrowed time and minimal evidence. He's inside setting up, going over his notes. Colt's voice was calm, but Bryn had learned to read him too. The way his hands clenched when he thought she wasn't looking. The way his jaw tightened when Silas's name came up. The way he checked the locks on the doors 3 times before bed. He was scared too, just better at hiding it. Mr. Colt? Bryn had tried calling him just Colt, but the mister kept slipping back in. Some habits Mama had taught her showed respect. What happens if the judge says we have to go with Papa Silas? Colt was quiet for a long moment. Then you go with him, because that's what the law says. And I can't break the law, kid. I've already got enough strikes against me. But he'll hurt us. I know. And nobody will stop him. I know that too. Bryn looked up at him, at this man with his scary face and his gentle hands and his promises that kept coming true. So what do we do? Colt met her eyes, and Bryn saw something in them she'd never seen before. Something that looked like determination mixed with resignation, mixed with a fury that had nowhere to go. We tell the truth, he said quietly. We tell the judge exactly what kind of man Silas Blackwell is. And we hope like hell that truth matters more than biology and money. The courtroom doors opened. A bailiff stepped out, clipboard in hand. Case number 7432, Blackwell versus Garrison, emergency custody hearing for minors. Bryn Hartley and River Hartley. Bryn's stomach dropped. This was it. The moment that would decide whether she and River got to stay in the small house that felt safe or whether they went back to the nightmare they'd been running from for 3 years. She stood, her legs shaky, picked up River's carrier with hands that trembled. Colt's palms settled on her shoulder, warm and steady. Remember what we talked about, he said quietly. Just tell the truth. Don't exaggerate. Don't leave things out. Just exactly what you saw and heard and felt. Can you do that? Bryn nodded. She could do that. She'd been doing that for 3 years, documenting Papa Silas's violence in the little notebook she'd hidden in her backpack. The notebook that was now sitting in Gus Fletcher's briefcase, ready to be entered as evidence, if the judge would allow it. They filed into the courtroom. It was smaller than Bryn had imagined, less dramatic than the courtrooms on TV. Wood paneling, rows of benches, a judge's bench that seemed impossibly high. And sitting behind it, reviewing papers with reading glasses, perched on her nose, was Judge Constance Winslow. She was 70, maybe older, her hair white, and swept back in a bun that reminded Bryn of pictures of her great-grandmother. But her eyes, when she looked up and surveyed the courtroom, were sharp, missing nothing. Please be seated, the bailiff intoned, the Honorable Judge Constance Winslow presiding. Everyone sat. The rustling of fabric and shuffling of papers seemed too loud in the quiet room. Judge Winslow studied the papers in front of her for another long moment. Then she removed her glasses and looked directly at Bryn. Miss Hartley, you're 8 years old, is that correct? Bryn stood because it seemed respectful. Yes, ma'am. And the infant River Hartley is your brother? Yes, ma'am. Please sit down, child. You don't need to stand. Judge Winslow's voice was kind but firm. This hearing is to determine emergency custody and potential permanent placement for you and your brother. Do you understand what that means? It means you're deciding if we have to go live with Papa Silas or if we can stay with Mr. Colt. A slight smile crossed the judge's face. That's a simplified but accurate assessment. Now we have 2 parties claiming custody. Mr. Silas Blackwell, who was married to your mother and is listed on your birth certificate as your legal father, and Mr. Colt Garrison, who has held temporary emergency custody for the past 72 hours, but has no legal relationship to either you or your brother. Mr. Blackwell's attorney, you may present your case. One of the lawyers in expensive suits stood. Diane Mercer, according to the nameplate on the table. She was in her 50s, perfectly groomed, and carried herself with the confidence of someone who'd never lost a case. Your Honor, this is a straightforward matter of parental rights. Silas Blackwell is Bryn Hartley's legal father, as confirmed by the birth certificate entered into evidence. While it's true that Mr. Blackwell and the deceased were divorced, custody arrangements were in place. Mrs. Sutton violated those arrangements by fleeing the state with the child. Objection! Gus Fletcher was on his feet. He was younger than Diane Mercer, less polished, but there was a fire in his eyes that Bryn recognized. The same fire she'd seen in Colt when he talked about protecting her and River. There was a restraining order in place. Mrs. Sutton was fleeing domestic violence, not violating custody arrangements. The restraining order, Diane said smoothly, was based on unsubstantiated allegations that were never proven in court. And legally it died with Mrs. Sutton. My client has every right to custody of his daughter. His stepdaughter, Gus corrected. The birth certificate lists Silas Blackwell, but DNA testing would show he has no biological relationship to Bryn. This was news to Bryn. She looked at Colt confused, but he was staring straight ahead, his jaw tight. Diane didn't miss a beat. Biological or not, he raised Bryn from infancy. He provided for her. He has legal standing regardless of genetics. And in contrast, Mr. Garrison is a complete stranger with a criminal record and a dishonorable discharge from the military. She pulled out a folder and Bryn's heart sank as Diane began presenting Colt's past like a weapon. The discharge, the assault on his commanding officer, the 6 months in military prison, the years with the Desert Wolves Motorcycle Club, the violence, the danger, the instability. All of it true, none of it the whole story. This is the man, Diane concluded, who Child Protective Services saw fit to place 2 traumatized children with. A man with documented anger issues, criminal associations, and no experience with childcare. Meanwhile, my client is a successful technology executive with a stable home, substantial resources, and a genuine desire to reconnect with his daughter. She sat down and Bryn felt like she'd been punched. Everything Diane said about Colt was true. On paper, Silas looked perfect. Colt looked dangerous, but paper didn't show the bruises on Mama's arms, didn't show the way Silas's voice turned cold when he was angry, didn't show the 3 years of running and hiding and being afraid. Judge Winslow turned to Gus. Mr. Fletcher, your response. Gus stood and Bryn could see his hands shaking slightly as he gathered his notes. He was nervous. They were losing. Your Honor, I'd like to call Bryn Hartley to testify. Bryn's heart stopped. She'd known this was coming, had practiced with Gus and Colt for hours. But knowing and doing were different things. The bailiff approached with a Bible. Bryn stood, placed her hand on it, and swore to tell the truth. The whole truth. Nothing but the truth. She climbed into the witness chair. It was too big for her. Her feet dangled. She felt small and young and terrified. But she'd been terrified before. For 3 years, and she'd survived. Gus approached gently. Bryn, can you tell the court about your life with Silas Blackwell? Bryn took a breath, looked at Colt, who nodded encouragement. Then she pulled out the notebook. I wrote it down, she said quietly. Everything. Mama taught me to document things. She said if something ever happened to her, I'd need proof. Objection. Diane was on her feet. This is clearly coach testimony. An 8-year-old doesn't spontaneously document abuse. Overruled, Judge Winslow said, her voice sharp. I want to hear what the child has to say. Proceed, Bryn. Bryn opened the notebook with trembling hands. The pages were filled with her careful 8-year-old handwriting. Dates, times, details. May 3rd, 2024, she read. Papa Silas grabbed Mama's arm in the kitchen. Squeezed until she cried. 5 bruises, purple and yellow. Mama wore long sleeves for 2 weeks. She turned the page. June 17th, 2024. Papa threw a plate at Mama, cut her cheek. She told the doctor she walked into a cabinet. Papa stood right there and smiled. Another page. August 2nd, 2024. Papa said Mama was worthless, said nobody would ever love her. Said she was lucky he even wanted her. Mama cried in the bathroom for an hour. I heard everything. Bryn's voice was mechanical, emotionless, reading the facts because feeling them would break her. The courtroom was silent except for her small voice reciting horror after horror. September 9th, 2024. Papa found out Mama was pregnant with River. He said it better not be another man's baby. He pushed Mama against the wall. I tried to stop him, and he said, "See what happens to people who disobey me, Bryn. See what happens." She looked up from the notebook, looked directly at Silas, who was sitting rigid in his chair, his face pale. "I was 5 years old," Bryn said, "and I understood. I understood that if I wasn't perfect, if I wasn't quiet, if I wasn't exactly what he wanted, Mama would pay for it. So I learned to be quiet. I learned to be perfect. I learned to be invisible." "Bryn," Gus said gently, "did Silas Blackwell ever hurt you directly?" "No, he didn't have to. Hurting Mama was enough. Making me watch was enough. I knew if I made him angry, Mama would suffer. That's a kind of hurt, too." Judge Winslow was leaning forward now, her expression intent. "When did your mother leave Mr. Blackwell?" 3 years ago, I was 5, almost 6. Mama packed our stuff while he was at work. We ran. We've been running ever since. And the restraining order, Mama filed it, said Papa was dangerous. The judge gave it to her. But Papa didn't care. He called from blocked numbers, sent emails from fake accounts, followed us to my school once. Mama called the police, and they said they couldn't do anything because he was just standing there. After that, Mama homeschooled me. "Why were you going to Tucson?" "To Grandma Rose. Mama said Grandma knew people who could help us disappear for real. Change our names. Move somewhere Papa could never find us. Mama said this was the last time we'd have to run." Bryn's voice cracked. She promised this was the last time. The courtroom was silent. Bryn could see several people wiping their eyes. Even the bailiff looked affected. Then Diane stood. "Your Honor, with all respect to what this child has been through, none of this is admissible evidence. It's hearsay. Uncorroborated claims in a notebook that could have been written at any time influenced by anyone." "I was there," Bryn's voice rose. "I saw it. I lived it. Every single thing in this notebook happened." "Or you believe it happened," Diane said, her voice gentle but relentless. "Children are impressionable. Your mother clearly had mental health issues, paranoia that caused her to run repeatedly to alienate you from your father. She may have genuinely believed she was being abused, but belief and reality aren't always the same thing." "Don't you talk about Mama like that." Bryn was on her feet now, shaking with rage. "Mama wasn't crazy. Mama was scared, and she was right to be scared because Papa hurt her, and nobody helped, and now she's dead." "Order!" Judge Winslow's gavel came down hard. "Everyone sit down. Now." Bryn sat, tears streaming down her face. She'd promised herself she wouldn't cry, promised she'd be strong. But Diane's words, the suggestion that Mama had been mentally ill, that the abuse wasn't real, it was too much. Colt was half out of his seat, his face dark with fury. Gus had a hand on his arm, holding him back. Silas, Bryn noticed, was smiling. Just slightly. Just enough for her to see. He thought he'd won. Judge Winslow removed her glasses, rubbed her eyes. "We're going to take a 15-minute recess. Everyone collect themselves. When we return, I want to hear from Mr. Garrison, and then I'll make my decision." The bailiff announced the recess, and people started filing out. Bryn didn't move. Couldn't move. She'd failed. She'd told the truth, and it hadn't mattered because truth without proof was just a story, and stories could be dismissed. Colt approached the witness stand, and the bailiff started to object, but Judge Winslow waved him off. "You did good, kid," Colt said quietly. "You told the truth. That's all anyone can ask." "But it didn't matter. They think Mama was crazy. They think I'm making it up." "Some people will always think that, but Judge Winslow, she was listening, really listening. Did you see her face?" Bryn had. The judge had looked sad. angry even, but sad and angry didn't mean that she'd rule in their favor. Come on, Colt said. Let's get some air before we have to go back in. They walked out into the hallway, and that's when Bryn saw her. A woman in her 50s, standing near the water fountain, staring at Bryn like she'd seen a ghost. She had Mama's eyes, Mama's cheekbones, Mama's hands, which she pressed against her mouth as tears streamed down her face. You must be Bryn, the woman whispered. Oh my God, you look just like her, just like Violet when she was little. Bryn didn't understand, didn't know who this woman was. But Colt did. His whole body had gone rigid. Rebecca, the woman nodded. Hello, Colt. It's been 20 years. You knew Mama? Bryn asked. I was your mama's college roommate, her best friend. Until... Rebecca's voice caught. Until Silas made her cut ties with everyone. I haven't seen Violet in 9 years. But when I heard about the custody hearing, when I heard that bastard was trying to take her children, I had to come. I have to testify. Gus had appeared from somewhere, his expression sharp with interest. You have information about Silas Blackwell. I have hospital records from 11 years ago. Before Violet married him, he choked her unconscious during an argument. She called me from the ER. She was going to press charges, but he threatened everyone she loved. Threatened me. Threatened her family. She dropped the charges and married him 6 months later. Rebecca pulled a folder from her bag. I kept everything, the medical report, photos of her injuries, text messages where she told me what he'd done. I kept it all because I knew someday she'd need it. I just thought. Her voice broke. I thought she'd be the one using it, not her children. Gus took the folder with shaking hands. This changes everything. This is documentation. Proof that predates the marriage that establishes a pattern of violence. Can you testify right now? That's why I'm here. They rushed back into the courtroom as the recess ended. Gus approached the bench, handed Judge Winslow. The folder spoke in urgent low tones. Diane objected, but the judge silenced her with a look. Mr. Fletcher, you have a new witness. Yes, Your Honor. Rebecca Martinez, college roommate of the deceased and witness to prior acts of domestic violence by Mr. Blackwell. Silas went pale. His lawyers huddled around him, whispering frantically. Rebecca took the stand. She was sworn in, and then she told her story. The assault 11 years ago, the hospital visit, the terror in Violet's voice when she called, the threats Silas made that forced Violet to drop the charges, the wedding that Rebecca had begged Violet not to go through with, the slow cutting off of all contact over the years as Silas isolated Violet completely. The last time I heard from her was 9 years ago, Rebecca said, tears streaming down her face. A 3-word text message. He's hurting me. I tried to respond. Number was disconnected. I tried to find her. She'd moved no forwarding address. I thought, she sobbed. I thought maybe she'd gotten away. Maybe she was safe somewhere. Then I saw her death notice in the paper, and I realized she never got away. She was running until the very end. Diane cross-examined aggressively, trying to discredit the testimony, suggesting Rebecca was lying, that the hospital records were taken out of context, that a single incident 11 years ago didn't prove a pattern. But the damage was done. Judge Winslow had read the medical report, had seen the photos of bruises around Violet's neck, had heard Rebecca's testimony, and she'd seen Silas's face when Rebecca walked into the courtroom. The recognition, the fear. I'd like to hear from Mr. Garrison now, Judge Winslow said. Colt took the stand and Bryn held her breath. Gus approached. Mr. Garrison, please tell the court about your military service. So Colt did. Enlisted at 22, Rangers by 24, 2 tours in Iraq, Purple Heart, Bronze Star, a record of service that would have been honorable if it hadn't ended the way it did. Tell the court about your discharge, Gus said quietly. Colt's jaw tightened. We were on patrol outside Fallujah. Firefight broke out. Civilians got caught in the crossfire. 3 children were killed by American bullets. My commanding officer ordered me to falsify the after-action report. Make it look like insurgents killed those kids. I refused. He ordered me again. I hit him multiple times, broke his jaw, his nose, 3 ribs. They had to pull me off. Why did you refuse the order? Because those kids deserve the truth. Their families deserve the truth. Lying about their deaths, pretending we weren't responsible, it was. It was wrong. I couldn't do it. So you sacrificed your career, your freedom, your honor to protect the truth about 3 children you'd never met. I didn't protect them, Colt said bitterly. They were already dead. I just made sure their deaths mattered. Gus paused, letting that sink in. And the Desert Wolves Motorcycle Club. After the discharge, I was angry, lost. The Wolves gave me somewhere to belong, but I left when they started getting into illegal activities. Weapons trafficking. I testified against 3 members in a murder case, helped put them away. So you turned on your own brothers to help convict murderers, knowing it would make you a target, knowing you'd lose everything again. It was the right thing to do. Gus looked at the judge. Your Honor, this is a man who has spent his life trying to protect people, especially children. He lost his military career protecting children. He lost his motorcycle club protecting justice. And now he's willing to fight for Bryn and River, even though he knows the odds are against him. That's not a dangerous man. That's a man with principles he won't compromise no matter the cost. Diane's cross-examination was brutal. She hammered on the violence, the assault, the prison time, the criminal associations, made Colt sound like a ticking time bomb waiting to explode. But Colt didn't react, didn't get angry, just answered her questions calmly, honestly, admitting his mistakes without making excuses. Mr. Garrison, Diane said finally, you've known these children for 3 days. Why are you really doing this? What's your angle? Colt looked at Bryn, held her gaze. 20 years ago, I loved Violet Sutton. She was kind and beautiful and too good for a broken guy like me. I went to war and came back wrong, and she moved on, and I never blamed her for that. But I never forgot her either. When I saw her in that car, when I realized I could have saved her if I'd been there sooner, if I'd stopped earlier. His voice caught. I can't save Violet, but I can save her children. I can make sure they don't go back to the man who made her life hell. That's why I'm doing this. Not for me, for her. The courtroom was silent. Then Silas stood up. This is ridiculous. His voice was loud, angry, the careful facade cracking. Those are my children, mine. I raised Bryn. I provided for them, just because that woman was paranoid because she filled everyone's heads with lies. Mr. Blackwell, sit down, Judge Winslow ordered. But Silas kept talking, his voice rising. She was crazy, unstable. She ran because she was paranoid, not because I hurt her. And now this criminal thinks he can take my children. They're not your children. The words burst out of Bryn before she could stop them. You're not my father, Mama said so. She said my real father was someone else, someone good, someone who didn't hurt people. The courtroom erupted. Silas lunged toward Bryn, and Colt was on his feet in an instant, moving to intercept. Bailiffs rushed forward. Judge Winslow's gavel came down like thunder. Order? Order, or I'll clear this courtroom. They got Silas back to his seat, but the damage was done. Everyone had seen his rage, seen the violence that lived just underneath the surface, seen exactly what Violet had been running from. Judge Winslow looked shaken. We're going to take another recess, 30 minutes. When I return, I'll give my decision. Bailiff, make sure Mr. Blackwell stays in this building, but away from the child. They filed out again. Bryn was shaking. River, who'd slept through most of the hearing, was awake now and fussing. Colt took him, rocking him gently, his face unreadable. Did I mess it up? Bryn whispered. I wasn't supposed to yell. You told the truth, Colt said. That's never wrong. But truth didn't always win. Bryn knew that. She'd seen Mama tell the truth to police officers, to judges, to social workers. And they'd nodded sympathetically and done nothing. The 30 minutes felt like hours. Finally, the bailiff called them back in. Judge Winslow took her seat. looked at all of them, her expression grave. "I've spent 45 years on the bench," she began. "I've presided over hundreds of custody cases. This is one of the most difficult decisions I've ever had to make." Bryn's heart hammered against her ribs. On one hand, we have Silas Blackwell, who has legal standing as Bryn's father, who has resources and stability. On the other hand, we have Cole Garrison, who has no legal relationship to these children, but who has demonstrated genuine care for their welfare. She paused. But this case isn't about what's convenient or what looks good on paper. It's about what's in the best interest of these children. And based on the testimony I've heard today, based on the evidence presented, I have serious concerns about Mr. Blackwell's fitness as a parent. Silas shot to his feet. "Your Honor, you can't. Sit down, Mr. Blackwell, or I'll hold you in contempt." Judge Winslow's voice was steel. The documented history of violence, the restraining order, the testimony of multiple witnesses, and most importantly, the fear evident in this child when she speaks about you. These factors cannot be ignored. She looked at Bryn. "However, I also cannot simply hand custody to Mr. Garrison without proper investigation and vetting. Therefore, I'm ordering a full investigation into Mr. Blackwell's history and fitness as a parent. This investigation will take approximately 60 days. 60 days, not permanent, but not immediate either. During this investigation period, I'm granting temporary custody to Mr. Garrison, subject to supervision and regular welfare checks by Child Protective Services. At the end of 60 days, we'll reconvene and I'll make a final determination." The gavel came down. Silas was on his feet, shouting. His lawyers were objecting. Diane was arguing about appeals and parental rights and legal precedent. But Judge Winslow was done. She stood, gathered her robes, and left the bench. Bryn sat frozen. 60 days, 2 months. It wasn't forever, but it was something. It was time. Colt's hand settled on her shoulder. "We won, kid. For now, we won." "For now," Bryn echoed, because 60 days would pass quickly, and then they'd be back here, fighting the same battle, unless they could find proof, real proof, something so undeniable that even Silas's money and lawyers couldn't overcome it. Bryn looked at her notebook at 3 years of documentation. It had helped, but it wasn't enough. She needed more. And as they filed out of the courtroom, as Silas glared at them with barely contained rage, Bryn made a decision. She was 8 years old. She'd survived an accident that killed her mother. She'd kept her baby brother alive in 100-degree heat. She testified in court against a man who terrified her. She could do one more impossible thing. She could find the proof that would keep them safe forever. The first week passed in a strange kind of normalcy. Colt enrolled Bryn in the local elementary school, a small building with a playground and classrooms that smelled like pencil shavings and cafeteria food. Bryn was placed in 3rd grade, even though she'd been homeschooled for 2 years and had gaps in her education. The other kids stared, whispered. They'd seen the news coverage of the custody hearing, seen Bryn's face on TV. "Is it true your dad's a biker?" a girl named Ashley asked at recess, her tone making it clear this wasn't a friendly question. Bryn didn't correct the assumption about Colt being her dad. "He used to be. My mom says bikers are criminals, says you shouldn't be allowed in our school." Bryn had heard worse, had dealt with worse. She turned away, headed for the monkey bars, where she could be alone. But the isolation hurt in ways she hadn't expected. At her old schools, before the running got bad, she'd had friends. Kids who didn't know about Papa Silas, or Mama's bruises, or the fear that followed them everywhere. Kids who just wanted to play. She ate lunch in the bathroom, sitting on the closed toilet lid in the far stall. A sandwich Colt had made her balanced on her knees. It was quiet there. Safe. When she got home, Colt was waiting outside the school river, strapped to his chest in a carrier that looked absurdly small against his large frame. Other parents gave them a wide berth, herding their children away like Colt was contagious. "How was school?" he asked as Bryn climbed into his truck. "Fine." He didn't push. That was one thing Bryn appreciated about Colt. He didn't demand conversation, didn't force her to share things she wasn't ready to share. They drove home in comfortable silence, and Bryn spent the afternoon doing homework at the kitchen table while Colt played with River on a blanket on the floor. He was getting better at the baby stuff, had learned River's different cries, knew when he was hungry versus tired versus just fussy. It was almost maybe starting to feel like a family. Then the phone call started. The first one came at midnight. Bryn woke to the sound of Colt's voice, low and angry, coming from the living room. How did you get this number? Pause. Stay away from them. The judge said no contact. Longer pause. You threatened me again and I'm calling the sheriff. The phone slammed down. Silence. Bryn crept to her bedroom door, peered out. Colt was sitting on the couch, his head in his hands, his shoulders tight with tension. She should go back to bed, should pretend she hadn't heard. But she'd spent 3 years pretending, and she was tired of it. Papa Silas, she asked quietly. Colt's head snapped up. You should be asleep, kid. Was it him? Colt sighed, nodded. He called to say, he said some things. Doesn't matter. Go back to bed. What things, Bryn? I'm not a baby. What did he say? Colt looked at her for a long moment. Then quietly, he said he knows where you go to school. Said he knows what time you get dropped off, what time you leave. Said 60 days goes by fast, and when it does, he's taking you home. Bryn felt cold despite the warmth of the house. He's watching us. I don't know. Maybe. Or maybe he's just trying to scare us. It's working. Colt stood cross to her, knelt down so they were eye level. Listen to me. I'm not going to let him hurt you. The judge said no contact. If he comes near you, near the school, near this house, I call Sheriff Vargas and he gets arrested. You understand? He's rich. Rich people don't get arrested. Sometimes they do, and we've got the law on our side this time. For 60 days, Bryn thought, and then what? The calls continued. Never at the same time, never from the same number. Block calls, burner phones untraceable. Silas saying just enough to be threatening without crossing into explicit violation of the judge's order. Colt reported them to Sheriff Vargas. She promised to patrol by the school by the house, but they both knew it wasn't enough. On day 12, Bryn was sitting at lunch in her bathroom stall when she heard voices outside. I can't believe she's allowed here. Ashley's voice. My mom says her stepdad's super rich and important. Says he's trying to get her back from the criminal who kidnapped her. The biker didn't kidnap her, another voice argued. She wanted to stay with him. Because she's been brainwashed. That's what my mom says. The biker probably told her all kinds of lies about her real dad. Bryn's sandwich turned to cardboard in her mouth. She wanted to burst out to defend Colt, to scream the truth about Silas. But what was the point? These kids wouldn't believe her. Their parents had already decided who the villain was. And looking dangerous was easier than being dangerous. Colt looked the part. Silas didn't. That afternoon, Bryn got off the bus to find Colt pacing in front of the house, River crying in his carrier, Colt's phone pressed to his ear. I don't care what your client says. He stays away from my kids or I press charges. Pause. Then you tell him that. He hung up, saw Bryn, tried to compose himself. Hey kid, how was school? Papa Silas's lawyers called. Yeah. Colt picked up River, bouncing him gently. They're saying we're alienating you from him, that he has a right to communication. I told them to go to hell, but legally they might have a point. I don't want to talk to him. I know, and you don't have to. But if this goes back to court, they're going to use that against us. Say we're poisoning you against him. I was already poisoned. He did that himself. Colt looked at her, something sad in his expression. I know, kid, but the law doesn't always see it that way. That night, lying in bed, Bryn made a decision. She pulled out her notebook, the one with all the documentation of Silas's abuse. 3 years of evidence. But it hadn't been enough. Rebecca's hospital records had helped, but they were 11 years old. Ancient history in the eyes of the law. Bryn needed something recent, something undeniable, something that would prove Silas was still dangerous. She remembered Mama's old phone, the one tucked in a box of belongings, that had been salvaged from the crashed car. Bryn had been avoiding that box, couldn't bear to look through Mama's things. But maybe there was something there. Text messages, emails, voicemails, evidence. The next day after school, while Colt was giving River a bath, Bryn found the box. Her hands shook as she opened it. Mama's wallet, her driver's license with a picture that was 5 years old from before the running had aged her, a book dog-eared and water-damaged, and the phone. Bryn held the phone, half expecting it to not work. But when she pressed the power button, it lit up, low battery but functional. She scrolled through the messages. Most were from blocked numbers. Silas, almost certainly. But they'd been deleted, probably by Mama trying to eliminate evidence of the harassment. Then Bryn found the voicemails. Mama had never deleted those. She pressed play on the first one. Silas's voice filled the small bedroom, and Bryn's whole body went cold. "Violet, I know you're there. I know you're listening. You can run as far as you want, but you're mine. You've always been mine. And that baby you're carrying, if it's not mine, you're going to pay for that. You understand me. You're going to pay." The message was dated 9 months ago, right when Mama got pregnant with River. Bryn played the next one. "You think you can hide from me? I found you in Phoenix. I found you in Albuquerque. I'll find you wherever you go, and when I do, you're going to wish you'd never run. You and that bastard kid both." More messages, dozens of them, escalating threats, promises of violence, proof of harassment that violated the restraining order. This was it. This was the evidence Bryn needed. She found Colt in the living room, River asleep on his chest. He looked exhausted, dark circles under his eyes from too many nights waking up with River, too many days worrying about the 60-day countdown. "Mr. Colt," Bryn said quietly, "I found something." She handed him the phone, showed him the voicemails, watched his expression darken as he listened. "How many are there?" he asked, his voice tight. 23, all from Papa Silas, all threatening Mama and River and me. "We need to get this to Gus tonight. Bryn, this is exactly what we need. This proves he violated the restraining order. Proves he was harassing your Mama right up until she died. Proves he's dangerous." Hope flared in Bryn's chest. Real hope. The kind that felt dangerous after so many disappointments. Will it be enough? "I don't know, but it's something. It's more than we had before." They called Gus, who came over immediately. He listened to the voicemails, his expression growing grimmer with each one. "This is gold," he said finally. "This is documentation of ongoing harassment, violation of a restraining order, threats of violence. Combined with Rebecca's testimony and Bryn's notebook, this builds a pattern of abuse that's undeniable. Can we submit it to the judge? We can do better than that. We can file criminal charges. Get Blackwell arrested." Bryn's breath caught. Papa Silas arrested, actually facing consequences for once. "How long would that take?" Colt asked. "Depends on the DA on how quickly they can move. But once charges are filed, once there's an active criminal case, it changes the custody situation entirely. Judges don't award custody to people facing criminal charges for domestic violence." For the first time in days, Bryn felt like she could breathe. They filed the charges the next morning. Sheriff Vargas came to the house personally to collect the phone to take Bryn's statement about the voicemails. "You did good, kiddo," the sheriff said as she was leaving. "This is brave. I know it's scary going up against someone powerful, but you're doing the right thing." Bryn wanted to believe her, wanted to believe that right mattered more than money and power. She'd find out soon enough. The arrest happened on day 23 of the 60-day investigation. Bryn was at school when it went down, sitting in her bathroom stall during lunch, eating a peanut butter sandwich that Colt had carefully packed with a note that said, "You're braver than you know," in his messy handwriting. Her phone buzzed. A text from Colt, which was unusual during school hours. "They got him. He's in custody. You're safe." Bryn read the message 3 times, her hands shaking so badly she almost dropped the phone. Papa Silas was arrested. Actually arrested. After 3 years of running, after all the times Mama had called the police and nothing happened, after all the restraining orders he'd violated with no consequences, he was finally facing justice. She should feel relief, triumph, something. Instead, she felt terror. Because Papa Silas didn't lose. He never lost. And cornering a dangerous man only made him more dangerous. When Colt picked her up after school, River strapped to his chest, as always, Bryn could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his eyes constantly scanned the parking lot. He made bail, Colt said before Bryn could ask. Posted it within 2 hours. He's out. The brief flare of hope died. So it didn't matter. It matters. He's got an ankle monitor now. Can't leave his house except for work and approved appointments. And the judge modified the custody order. Said with active criminal charges, the 60-day hearing is pointless. We go back to court in 2 weeks for final determination. 2 weeks, 14 days, not 60. The timeline had collapsed. Is that good or bad? Bryn asked. Colt was quiet for a long moment as he drove. Honestly, kid, I don't know. Good because we don't have to wait as long. Bad because we got less time to build our case. Gus is working on finding more witnesses, more documentation. But 2 weeks. He shook his head. It's not much time. That night, Bryn lay in bed, unable to sleep. River was fussing in his crib, and she could hear Colt walking back and forth in the living room, murmuring nonsense words in his rough voice until the baby settled. She thought about the final hearing, about standing in front of Judge Winslow and making the case for why she and River should stay with Colt instead of going to Papa Silas, about the lawyers and the questions and the way Silas would stare at her with those cold eyes, about losing, because they might lose, probably would lose. Silas had money and lawyers and a lifetime of getting away with things. They had a biker with a criminal record and 8-year-old's testimony and hope that was wearing thinner every day. Bryn pulled out her notebook, looked at all the careful documentation. 3 years of dates and times and descriptions of violence. It had helped, but it hadn't been enough to stop this fight from happening. She needed to be smarter, stronger, better. And then she remembered something Mama used to say when they were planning their escapes, when they were figuring out how to disappear. The best defense is preparation. Know your enemy better than he knows himself. Bryn knew Papa Silas, knew his patterns, his triggers, his weaknesses. And she knew something else, something she'd heard in one of those voicemails on Mama's phone, a comment about the business and keeping things quiet and can't have scandals right now. Papa Silas cared about his reputation, his tech company, his standing in the community, his image as a successful businessman. The abuse had always happened behind closed doors because he couldn't risk people knowing what he really was. What if people knew? The thought came to Bryn fully formed, like something she'd been building toward without realizing it. What if she took away his most powerful weapon, his respectable facade? She thought about this for 3 days, turned it over in her mind while she sat in her bathroom stall at lunch, while she did homework at the kitchen table, while she helped Colt give River his bottles. On day 26, she asked Colt a question. Mr. Colt, do you know how to use social media? He looked up from the motorcycle part he was cleaning, surprise crossing his face. Why? I want to tell our story publicly, so everyone knows what Papa Silas really is. Colt put down the part, his full attention on her now. Bryn, that could backfire, could make things worse. How he's already trying to take us, already violated the restraining order, already hurt Mama for years. How does people knowing the truth make it worse? Because once it's out there, you can't take it back. And Silas, he'll come after you harder. Use it against you. Say you're being coached, manipulated. He's going to say that anyway. But if people know, if his company knows, if everyone sees what he did. Bryn's voice grew stronger. He cares about his reputation. It's the only thing he cares about besides control. What if we take that away from him? Colt studied her for a long moment. Then he called Gus. The lawyer arrived within an hour and Bryn explained her plan. She wanted to write out everything that had happened. The abuse, the running, the crash, the custody battle. She wanted to post it publicly, let the world see what Silas Blackwell really was. Gus listened, his expression thoughtful. It's risky, but it might work. Public opinion doesn't win court cases, but it can put pressure on the other side. Make them settle, make concessions. And if Blackwell's company gets wind of this, if it affects his business, he might back off to protect his bottom line. Or it might enrage him, Colt countered. Make him fight harder. He's already fighting as hard as he can, Bryn said quietly. What do we have to lose? Nobody had an answer for that. They spent the next 2 days crafting the statement. Bryn wrote it in her careful 8-year-old handwriting, every word true, every detail documented. Gus edited it for legal safety, made sure nothing could be considered slander. Colt read it 3 times, his jaw getting tighter with each pass. You sure about this kid? He asked. Once we post this, there's no going back. I'm sure. They posted it on day 28, a simple Facebook post from an account Gus had set up with a photo of Bryn holding River, both of them smiling in a rare moment of happiness. The text below told their story in stark, simple terms. The post went on. Details about the abuse carefully worded to avoid legal issues but unflinching in their honesty. The restraining order violations. The voicemails threatening Mama and River. The 3 years of running and hiding. And at the end, a simple plea. Please share this. Please let people know what's happening. Please help us stay safe. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Within 6 hours, the post had been shared 10,000 times. Within 12 hours, 100,000. Local news picked it up, then national news. Within 24 hours, Bryn's story was everywhere. The comment section exploded. Thousands of people expressing outrage, offering support, sharing their own stories of domestic violence and custody battles. Some skeptical voices questioned the story, suggested it was fake or manipulated, but they were drowned out by the wave of support. More importantly, people started digging into Silas Blackwell's background. His company, Black Tech Solutions, suddenly found itself under scrutiny. Employees came forward anonymously, posting about his temper, his controlling behavior, his treatment of female employees. Business partners started distancing themselves. His carefully constructed reputation crumbled in 48 hours. On day 30, Silas's lawyers contacted Gus with a settlement offer. Full custody to Colt in exchange for taking down the post and signing a non-disclosure agreement. Bryn's first instinct was to accept. They'd won. She and River could stay with Colt, stay safe, stay together. But Gus shook his head. It's a trap. The NDA would prevent you from ever talking about the abuse again. If Silas violated the custody agreement later, you couldn't speak publicly about it. You'd be silenced. But we'd be safe, Bryn argued. Would you, Colt asked quietly, or would you just be giving him a different kind of control? The ability to make you disappear from view to do whatever he wants, knowing you can't talk about it. Bryn thought about Mama, about 3 years of silence and running, about how the secrecy had been part of the abuse, the isolation that made it impossible to get help. No NDA, she said firmly. We keep telling the truth. They rejected the offer. Silas responded by filing a defamation lawsuit, claimed every word in the post was a lie, that Bryn had been coached by Colt to destroy his reputation, asked for millions in damages. The lawsuit made the news too, and it backfired spectacularly, because now even more people were paying attention. Now Rebecca Martinez came forward publicly, not just in court documents, but in interviews. Now neighbors from the house where Silas and Mama had lived started talking, confirming the fights, the police visits, the fear in Valletta's eyes. Now former employees of Black Tech Solutions filed formal complaints with HR about Silas's behavior. Now business clients started canceling contracts. Silas Blackwell's world was collapsing, and it was an 8-year-old girl who'd brought it down. The final hearing was scheduled for day 37, 5 days away, and in those 5 days, everything accelerated. Day 33 brought a surprise visitor to Colt's house, A woman in her mid-40s, dressed professionally, carrying a briefcase that screamed lawyer, but with kind eyes that had suggested something else. "My name is Patricia Hammond," she introduced herself. "I'm a family law attorney from Seattle. I've been following Bryn's story and I'd like to offer my services. Pro bono." Gus, who'd been handling the case on borrowed time and minimal resources, looked like he might cry. "Why?" "Because I had a client 5 years ago. Similar situation. Abusive husband with money and power. She fought for custody, loss went back to him." Patricia's voice went quiet. "He killed her 6 months later. Her children went into foster care. I swore I'd never let that happen again if I could help it. So let me help." They accepted. Patricia brought resources Gus didn't have. Investigators who could dig into Silas's finances, find patterns of harassment that went beyond Violet. Expert witnesses on domestic violence who could testify about patterns of abuse and why children's testimony should be believed. She also brought a strategy. Instead of just defending against Silas's custody claim, they were going to systematically dismantle his entire case. Prove not just that he was dangerous, but that giving him custody would be a death sentence for Bryn and River. Day 35 brought another development. Black Tech Solutions Board of Directors announced that Silas Blackwell was taking an indefinite leave of absence. The stock price had dropped 20% in a week. Major clients were pulling contracts. The company was hemorrhaging money and reputation. All because an 8-year-old had told the truth. That night, Bryn's phone rang. Unknown number. She should have ignored it, should have let it go to voicemail. But something made her answer. "Bryn," Papa Silas's voice, and she nearly dropped the phone. "We need to talk." "You're not supposed to call me," the judge said. "I know what the judge said, but you need to understand something. What you've done this public campaign, it's destroyed my life, my company, my reputation, everything I've built." "Good," Bryn said, surprising herself with the firmness in her voice. "You destroyed Mama's life. You destroyed our lives. Now you know how it feels. You don't understand. That post, those lies. They're not lies. Everything I said was true." "Truth is relative, Bryn. You were a child. You saw things through a child's eyes, misinterpreted." "I know what I saw. I know what you did." Silas's voice changed, went cold. "Fine. You want the truth. Here it is. River isn't mine. I know that. Your mother cheated, got pregnant, threw it in my face. You think I was going to just accept raising another man's bastard?" The words hit Bryn like a slap. She'd suspected River wasn't Silas's mama, had hinted at it, but hearing him say it with such venom. "That's why you hurt Mama even more after River was born," Bryn said quietly. "Because you're cruel and petty, and you couldn't stand that she found happiness somewhere else." "I'm cruel." Silas laughed, harsh and bitter. "I gave your mother everything, a home, money, status, and she repaid me by running away, by turning my own daughter against me, by destroying my life with her lies. I'm not your daughter. Mama said so. And I'm glad I don't have your blood." The silence on the other end was deadly. Then Silas spoke, and his voice was pure ice. "You're going to regret this, Bryn, all of it. The post, the lies, this conversation. When I get custody, and I will get custody, you're going to pay for every word you've said, you and that bastard both." The line went dead. Bryn sat frozen, the phone shaking in her hand. She should tell Colt, should report the call, but she was paralyzed by the rage in Silas's voice, the absolute certainty of his threats. River started crying in the other room. The sound snapped Bryn out of her paralysis. She went to him, picked him up, held him close. "It's okay," she whispered. "I'm not gonna let him hurt you. I'm not gonna let him hurt either of us." But the fear sat in her chest like a stone. Because Silas was right about one thing. He had money and lawyers and power. And despite everything they'd done, despite the public support and the new lawyer and the evidence, he might still win. Day 37 arrived. The final hearing. The courtroom was packed, unlike the first hearing. News cameras outside, reporters trying to get statements, protesters holding signs supporting Bryn. It was overwhelming, surreal. Bryn felt like she was watching it happen to someone else. Inside, Judge Winslow looked tired. This case had clearly taken a toll on her, too. She called the court to order, and the noise settled into tense silence. We're here for final determination of custody for minors, Bryn Hartley and River Hartley. I've reviewed the additional evidence submitted by both parties, and I have some questions before we proceed. She looked at Silas. Mr. Blackwell, you've been charged with multiple counts of violating a restraining order, harassment, and making terroristic threats. How do you plead? Silas stood his lawyer beside him. Not guilty, Your Honor. These charges are based on a vendetta by my ex-wife and her allies to paint me as a monster. And the voicemails, the documented calls to a number protected by a restraining order. Taken out of context. I was trying to reach my daughter to maintain a relationship that was being systematically destroyed. By threatening violence against a 6-month-old infant, I was angry. I said things I shouldn't have. But words aren't actions. Judge Winslow's expression suggested she disagreed strongly, but she moved on. Mrs. Hammond, you're now representing Mr. Garrison. Patricia stood. Yes, Your Honor, we have substantial new evidence to present regarding Mr. Blackwell's unfitness as a parent and his pattern of abuse extending beyond his relationship with Violet Sutton. Proceed. What followed was methodical destruction. Patricia called witness after witness. Former employees of Black Tech who testified about Silas's explosive temper, his verbal abuse, his pattern of targeting women. Neighbors who'd heard the fight, seen Violet with bruises, called the police multiple times only to watch Silas talk his way out of consequences. A child psychologist who specialized in domestic violence testified about the impact on children who witness abuse, about how Bryn's testimony showed classic signs of a child who'd lived in fear. Rebecca Martinez testified again, but this time with additional evidence. She'd kept a journal during college, had documented not just the choking incident, but a pattern of controlling behavior that started early in Silas and Violet's relationship. Then Patricia called Bryn to the stand. Bryn had testified before, but this time felt different. This time the whole world was watching. This time everything depended on her words. Patricia approached gently. Bryn, you wrote a public post about your experiences. I want you to tell the court in your own words why you did that. Bryn took a breath. She'd practiced this, but practiced words felt hollow now. I was scared, she said simply. Scared that nobody would believe us. Scared that Papa Silas would win because he has money and we don't. Scared that telling the truth in private wasn't enough. So I told it publicly. Because Mama always said the truth matters, and if it matters, it shouldn't have to be a secret. Do you regret it? The post has caused significant disruption to Mr. Blackwell's life. No, Bryn's voice was firm. He disrupted Mama's life for years. He disrupted my life. He would have disrupted River's life if we'd gone back to him. I'm not sorry that people finally know what he is. What is he, Bryn? A man who hurts people and thinks he can get away with it because he's rich and powerful. A man who made my mama so scared she'd rather drive across the desert with 2 kids than stay in the same state as him. A man who threatened to hurt a baby because he couldn't control Mama anymore. And how do you feel about Mr. Garrison? Bryn looked at Colt, sitting at the table with River in his arms. Colt, who'd stopped when nobody else did, who'd kept every promise, who looked scary but whose hands were gentle, who'd given them a home when they had nothing. I love him, Bryn said, and her voice cracked. He's not perfect. He's got a bad past and he's rough around the edges and he didn't know anything about babies before River. But he's good. He's safe. He makes me feel like I can breathe for the first time in 3 years. And he loves us back. Not because he has to, not because the law says so, just because he does. The courtroom was silent. Patricia nodded. Thank you, Bryn. No further questions. Silas's lawyer, Diane Mercer, stood for cross-examination. But before she could speak, Judge Winslow held up a hand. Actually, I have a question for the child. She looked at Bryn. Bryn, you said in your post that you're not Mr. Blackwell's biological daughter. Can you explain that? Bryn nodded. Mama told me. She said my real father was someone else. Someone from before she met Papa Silas. She never said who, just that he was a good man who didn't know about me. And does Mr. Garrison know who your biological father is? The courtroom seemed to hold its breath. Bryn thought about the timeline, about Mama and Colt 20 years ago before Colt deployed, about the timing that didn't quite add up because Bryn was only 8, not 20. But River was 6 months old, and Mama had seen Colt 1 year ago. Bryn had found the date in Mama's journal after digging through her things. A brief note. Saw C today. One last goodbye. One last mistake that felt right. River's father was Colt. Bryn was certain of it now. The timeline matched. The way Colt looked at River sometimes like he was seeing something he recognized. The way River had Colt's eyes, that same pale blue. But Bryn wasn't Colt's. She was someone else's child, someone Mama had loved before Silas destroyed her ability to love freely. I don't know who my father is, Bryn said carefully, but I know it's not Papa Silas. He's not my father in any way that matters. Judge Winslow made a note. Mr. Blackwell, given that you are not Bryn's biological father and you're facing criminal charges related to domestic violence, why should I award you custody? Silas stood, and for the first time, Bryn saw him rattled. His composure was cracking. Because I raised her, because I provided for her, because regardless of biology, she's my daughter under the law. Under a law that prioritizes biological and legal ties over the welfare of the child. Under the law that says children belong with their parents, not with strangers who've known them for weeks. I see. Judge Winslow turned to Patricia. Mrs. Hammond, does Mr. Garrison wish to pursue adoption of both children? Patricia stood. Yes, Your Honor. We're prepared to file adoption papers for both Bryn and River immediately upon custody being granted. And Mr. Garrison, you understand the responsibility you're taking on 2 children, one an infant, one with significant trauma. The financial burden, the emotional complexity, the permanence of adoption. Colt stood, River still in his arms. I understand, Your Honor. These kids, they changed my life. River, Colt's voice caught. He's my son. Biologically, legally, however you wanted to define it. He's mine. And Bryn, she's the bravest person I've ever met. Braver than any soldier I served with. She deserves better than what she's gotten from the world. Deserves someone who will fight for her the way she's been fighting for her brother. I want to be that person. Why? The question was simple, but it carried weight. Colt looked at Bryn, at River, then back at the judge. Because 37 cars drove past them on that highway. And I stopped. And that choice, that moment, it meant something. Had to mean something. And I stopped being a good man a long time ago. Did things I'm not proud of. Hurt people, destroyed my own life in a dozen different ways. But these kids, they made me want to be good again. Made me believe I could be. And if I can give them a home, a safe place to grow up, a chance to not be scared anymore, then maybe all the bad I've done balances out. Maybe I can be worthy of the trust they put in me. The courtroom was silent again, but it was a different silence. Expectant. Judge Winslow removed her glasses, rubbed her eyes. She looked at all the evidence spread before her, at the testimonies and documents and exhibits. At Silas Blackwell with his expensive lawyers and his criminal charges. At Colt Garrison with his past and his promises. At Bryn, 8 years old, waiting for adults to decide her fate. In my 45 years on the bench, Judge Winslow began. I have presided over hundreds of custody cases. I have seen biological parents fight for children they never wanted. I have seen strangers step in when families failed. I have made decisions that kept children safe and decisions that in hindsight I deeply regret. This case will not be one of my regrets. She paused, and Bryn's heart hammered so hard she thought everyone could hear it. The evidence presented is overwhelming. Mr. Blackwell has a documented history of domestic violence spanning over a decade. He violated restraining orders, He made explicit threats against an infant. His own words recorded on voicemails demonstrate a pattern of harassment and intimidation. The testimony of multiple witnesses confirms that Violet Sutton lived in fear that she spent years running from abuse, that her death came while fleeing to safety that she never reached. Silas's face was red, his jaw clenched. Furthermore, Mr. Blackwell's behavior during these proceedings has been concerning. The angry outburst, the violation of no contact orders, the ongoing harassment of Mr. Garrison and the children. This is not the behavior of a man seeking to parent. This is the behavior of a man seeking to control. Judge Winslow looked at Bryn. This child has shown extraordinary courage. She documented abuse for 3 years. She kept her brother alive under impossible circumstances. She testified truthfully despite tremendous pressure. She advocated for herself and her brother when the adults in her life failed her. That level of maturity and strength tells me everything I need to know about what environment is best for her continued development. She picked up her gavel. Therefore, I am terminating all parental rights of Silas Blackwell to both Bryn Hartley and River Hartley. Furthermore, I am granting permanent legal custody to Colt Garrison with immediate authorization to pursue adoption. Mr. Blackwell, you are prohibited from any contact with these children. Any violation will result in immediate arrest and additional charges. Do you understand, Silas exploded. He was on his feet, shouting, his lawyers trying to restrain him. You can't do this. Those are my children. Mine, this is because of that post, because she destroyed my reputation with lies. Bailiff, Judge Winslow's voice cut through the chaos. Remove Mr. Blackwell from my courtroom. 2 bailiffs moved in, grabbing Silas by the arms. He fought them, still shouting. This isn't over. I'll appeal. I'll take this to every court in the country. You can't take my children. They were never yours, Judge Winslow said quietly, but her voice carried. You had a responsibility to care for them, protect them, love them. You failed in every measure. These children deserve better. And today, they're getting it. The bailiffs dragged Silas out, his shouts echoing down the hallway until a door slammed and silence fell. Judge Winslow looked at Bryn and her stern expression softened. Bryn Adelaide Hartley, in approximately 6 months when the adoption is finalized, you will become Bryn Adelaide Garrison. And your brother will become River James Garrison. I wish you both every happiness. Court is adjourned. The gavel came down, and just like that, it was over. Bryn sat frozen, unable to process what had just happened. They'd won. Actually won. Silas's parental rights were terminated. She and River were safe. They got to stay with Colt. Forever. The courtroom erupted in cheers. People Bryn didn't know were crying, applauding. Patricia was shaking Gus's hand. Sheriff Vargas was grinning. Angie Porter, the social worker, was wiping tears. And Colt was crossing to Bryn River in one arm, reaching for her with the other. Bryn stood on shaky legs and fell into his arms. Let herself be held. Let herself cry finally after weeks of being strong. Let herself be 8 years old and scared and relieved and overwhelmed. We did it, Colt murmured into her hair. You did it, kid. You saved yourself. You saved River. You saved all of us. We saved each other, Bryn whispered back. The next 6 months passed in a blur of normalcy that felt miraculous after so much chaos. Bryn stayed at the same school, and slowly the other kids stopped whispering, started including her. She made a friend, a girl named Sophie, who liked books and didn't care that Bryn's dad was a biker. River grew, learned to crawl then, to pull himself up on furniture. Said his first word, which was B, his attempt at Bryn's name. Colt cried when it happened, big tears that he tried to hide, but Bryn saw anyway. Colt got a job at a motorcycle repair shop, steady work with honest pay. Traded his intimidating leather vest for plain t-shirts, though he kept the tattoos, kept his past, but built a future on top of it. They became a family, not the traditional kind, not the kind in storybooks, but the real kind, the kind built on choice and love, and the determination to be better than the broken pieces they'd all started as. The adoption hearing was scheduled for January 15th, 6 months and 2 days after the custody decision. It was a formality, Judge Winslow had said, but it mattered. It made everything legal, permanent, real. The night before the hearing, Bryn couldn't sleep. She lay in her bed in her room that didn't feel temporary anymore, listening to River babbling in his crib and Colt's heavy footsteps pacing in the living room. She got up, found Colt sitting on the couch, staring at papers spread across the coffee table. "Can't sleep either?" he asked. Bryn shook her head, sat beside him, nervous. "Terrified," Colt admitted. "What if I screw this up? What if I'm not good enough to be your dad, to be River's dad?" "You already are our dad," Bryn said simply. "Tomorrow just makes it official." Colt looked at her, and Bryn saw the vulnerability in his face. This scary-looking man with his rough edges and his violent past, terrified of failing two kids who needed him. "You're going to be a good dad," Bryn said with certainty she didn't know she possessed. "You already are, because you stopped, because you stayed, because you keep choosing us even when it's hard." "It's not hard," Colt said. "That's the thing, kid. You and River, you're the easiest choice I've ever made." The next morning, they dressed in their best clothes. Colt in the suit he'd bought specifically for this occasion, uncomfortable in the collar but determined. River in a little outfit with a bow tie that he kept trying to eat. Bryn in a blue dress that reminded her of Mama, but didn't make her sad anymore. The courtroom was smaller this time. Just Judge Winslow, a court clerk, and their small family. No reporters, no drama. Just a quiet legal procedure that would change everything. "Colt Garrison," Judge Winslow began, "do you understand the gravity and permanence of adoption, that you are assuming full parental rights and responsibilities for Bryn Adelaide Hartley and River James Hartley? I do, Your Honor. And do you promise to care for, protect, and love these children for the rest of your life, to the best of your ability, regardless of challenges that may arise?" "I do." Bryn, the judge, looked at her. "You're 8 years old, but you've shown wisdom beyond your years. Do you want Colt Garrison to be your legal father?" Bryn stood, her thumbs clear and certain. "Yes, Your Honor, more than anything." "And why?" Bryn thought about everything that had brought them here. The crash, the fear, the fighting, the choice to trust a stranger who turned out to be exactly what she needed. "Because he makes me feel safe," she said. "Because he loves River even though River isn't. Even though things are complicated. Because he's not perfect, but he tries so hard. Because he stopped when everyone else drove by. Because he's my dad in every way that matters." Judge Winslow smiled a rare, genuine smile that transformed her stern face. "Then by the power vested in me by the state of Arizona, I declare this adoption final and legal. Bryn Adelaide Hartley and River James Hartley are now and forever will be Bryn Adelaide Garrison and River James Garrison. Congratulations. You're officially a family." The gavel came down one last time. And Bryn Adelaide Garrison, 8 years old, orphaned and rescued, and forever changed by a man who stopped on a highway, felt something settle in her chest. Something that felt like home. They took a family photo on the courthouse steps. Colt holding River, his arm around Bryn, all three of them smiling. It wasn't a perfect photo. River was drooling. Colt looked uncomfortable in his suit. Bryn's smile was a little wobbly from trying not to cry, but it was real, and it was theirs. 6 months later, on a warm July afternoon, exactly 1 year after the crash, they returned to the spot where it all began. State Route 77 mile marker 43, the place where Violet Sutton died and where 3 lives changed forever. Bryn carried flowers, white roses that had been Mama's favorite. She placed them on the shoulder where she'd sat holding River, counting cars, waiting for help. "Hi, Mama," she whispered. "We're okay. River's walking now. Talking. He's got Colt's eyes, did you know that? And he's happy. We're both happy. We're safe." She paused, tears streaming down her face. "I miss you every day, but I understand now why you ran, why you fought so hard to protect us. And I'm going to make you proud. I'm going to grow up strong and brave and I'm going to help other kids like us. Kids who need someone to believe them, someone to stop. Colt stood a respectful distance away, holding River, giving Bryn space for her goodbye. But when she turned to him, tears streaming, he was there, always there. They stood together on that highway, the three of them, and watched the sun set over the desert that had almost claimed them. Thank you, Bryn said to Colt. Not for the first time, not for the last. For what? For stopping. Colt looked down at her, at River, at this improbable family built from tragedy and choice. Thank you for letting me. They got in the truck and drove home. Not to a trailer, not to a place that felt temporary, but home, real home. The kind built on love and trust in the radical act of choosing each other when the world said they shouldn't. That night, tucking Bryn into bed, Colt asked if she wanted a bedtime story. Tell me the one about the girl on the highway, Bryn requested. You've heard that one 100 times. Tell it again. So Colt settled into the chair beside her bed and began. Once upon a time, there was a brave girl named Bryn who saved her baby brother in the desert. She was only 8 years old, but she was stronger than most grown men. And when a scary-looking stranger stopped to help, she made the bravest choice of her life. She trusted him. Was he really scary? Bryn asked, playing her part in their familiar routine. He looked scary, covered in tattoos, riding a motorcycle rough around every edge. But looks can be deceiving, because underneath he had a heart that had been broken, but was learning to heal. And the girl, what happened to her? She taught the scary man how to be a dad, taught him that family isn't about blood or biology. It's about showing up. It's about keeping promises. It's about loving someone enough to fight the whole world for them. Did they live happily ever after? Colt smiled, reached over to brush hair from Bryn's face. They lived, and they were happy, and they were a family, which is better than any fairy tale ending. Bryn smiled, her eyes already closing. I love you, Dad. The words still caught Colt off guard, even after 6 months of hearing it. Dad. Not Mr. Colt, not Colt, Dad. I love you too, kiddo. Now sleep. We've got River's first birthday party to plan tomorrow. Bryn drifted off, safe and loved and home. And in the room next door, River slept in his crib, surrounded by the family he'd been born into and the family he'd found. Colt sat in his living room, looked at the photos on the wall, the adoption day picture, Bryn's school photos, River's first steps captured on Colt's phone, a life documented not in violence and fear, but in joy and growth and love. He thought about the highway, about the moment he'd almost driven past, about 37 cars that made a different choice, about the choice he'd made that changed 3 lives forever. Sometimes Colt thought redemption doesn't come from erasing your past. It comes from building something better on top of it, from being the person someone needs even when you don't think you're worthy, from stopping when everyone else drives by. Outside, the Arizona stars blazed in an endless sky. Inside, 2 children slept safe and warm, dreaming of futures that didn't include fear. And Colt Garrison, former soldier, former criminal, current father, finally allowed himself to believe he deserved this. The girl on the highway had saved her brother, but she'd saved him too. And that made all the difference.